Can you see anything?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, classmates. Today with Daniela Canales are going to talk about the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And here is her two covers of the book, so you can see. Daniela?
I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we're going to talk about this book. We're going to be covering several topics, and the first one to cover is the author of the book. The author is Samuel Langhorne Clemens, as well known as Mark Twain. He was born in. Can you hear me well? Sorry, I didn't ask before.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So he was born in 1835 in Missouri. He didn't come from a prosperous family. He was the sixth of 7 children, and his father died when he was only 11 years old. Eventually, he quit school when he was in 5th grade, and furthermore, he became a printer's apprentice. And by the year of 15 years old, he would find himself writing funny articles for his brother's paper. However, he quit school. He would also want to get him a certain education, so he could hang around in public libraries in order to do so. In 1859, he got a license to pilot steamboats. That's where the knowledge of the Mississippi River comes from. The Mississippi River, we're going to talk about that later, is one of the settings of the story. And he knew this place very well because of his experience in the steamboats. In 1861, he became a part of the American Civil War. He volunteered himself as a Confederate soldier, even though this experience lasted only 2 weeks. It is important to mention here that he struggled a lot with writing the book. For instance, he started writing it in 1876, and he would say to his friends something like, okay, this is a good book, but I'm not that convinced at all in order to publish it already. So it took several years to finally make his mind and make the decision to publish it in 1884. He got married and had 4 children, and he passed away in 1910. Go ahead.
Well, this book, it is considered one of the great American novels. As we discussed on Monday, it is really famous, and as along with Tom Sawyer, it's one of the classics of American literature. And it was first published in England, actually, in 1884, and then the next year in America in its American edition. This book is composed by 43 short chapters. The chapters are like 5 pages, some more, some less, but they're very short and easy to read. The story, the book is divided into 3 parts, and this is a sequel of Tom Sawyer, which means that the adventures of Huckleberry Finn starts where Tom Sawyer ended. This book fits into the category or into the naturalistic period, which means that this story portrays reality. It is an expression and a criticism of the reality of the time, and therefore it is known as naturalistic type of book.
In terms of the context, we need to acknowledge that the story was written after the abolition of slavery and after the Civil War as well. However, the main topic here it is that the story is set when slavery was still legal in the years of 1830s and 1840s. So there was legal slavery. In terms of laborers, this was a very important topic for the story because it remains and it strengthened an economic system based on slavery exploitation, where there is like a pyramid and the white supremacy and the masters were at the top of it, and at the lower part of the pyramid at the bottom were people of color, slaves, who were treated as objects. And also, if this pyramid or this economic system falls apart, then it means the incomes would decrease, and also they would lose their workforce. Yeah. And in terms of ideologies, there are many ideologies throughout the story. For instance, we can say that there are two remarkable ones. On the one hand, there is this civilized world, and on the other hand, the uncivilized world. On the one hand, the civilized one means that people are educated, they believe in God, or they have religious beliefs, strong religious beliefs, and they also speak properly. They I don't know if I mentioned, but they would dress nicely and have some morals. And on the contrary, we have the uncivilized world or society, which is represented by drunken people, uneducated people who wouldn't dress as properly as civilized people and do not have good attitudes, and they misbehave. Yeah.
Yes. Then we have an analysis of the language and the narrator of the story. Here I put a fragment of the book, and here you can see how the language used in this book is really casual and ungrammatical. It is really easy to read. It's like someone was writing a story themselves and trying to tell it to you. It has also a conversational style, since the narrator is actually a protagonist narrator. This is a first-person point of view, which means that it is Huckleberry Finn which tells his own story.
So in the tone, we could say that this book has a moralistic and dark tone. Moralistic because there are several moral how can I say this? There are several teaching. They based their ideologies, their ways of living in morality, in religions. Therefore, this was very important to acknowledge that there is a heaven and there is also a hell if you don't behave the way God tells you to do. And dark, we could see that at the end of the story. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but it is easily identified at the end of the story because there's certain events that contrast the whole point of the story and the book. Ironic is connected to the dark tone, We are also going to see that at the end, and breezy and optimistic because in the setting in the Mississippi River, for example, when the characters were on a raft, that we're going to also talk about that later, they could seek their freedom, they could feel independent, and they would be able to make their own decisions. And the setting, as I mentioned before, is the Mississippi River and the natural surroundings.
Well, now we are going to jump right into the plot. The introduction of the story, as I said before, it starts where Tom Sawyer ended. And this is where Huckleberry Finn ends up living with his caretakers, which are Widow Douglas at the left side of your screen. This woman who's reading this book, the Bible, and her sister called Miss Watson, which is at the right side of your screen. These are the Huck's caretakers, since his father cannot no longer take care of him, and he doesn't have a mother. Well, Widow Douglas and Miss Watson teach him manners and try to civilize him. Miss Watson is like a more strict person and talks about God in a really punished as a really punished God. Instead, Widow Douglas talks about a God which is has mercy and is more loving. Therefore, Huckleberry Finn thinks that this God that they talk about are different gods. Widow Douglas God and Miss Watson's God. Well, they teach him good manners. They read the Bible. They pray, and therefore Huckleberry Finn starts to have this morality sense, and is really conflicted inside because religious and legality and all this slavery situation is really confusing for him, a young boy. After this period of time, he meets with Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer invites him to a gang of thieves, which is actually just a group of teenagers which pretend to be thieves. And this is like some sort of group, and they swear an oath with their blood that they will be doing thieves stuff, and if someone says a word, they would kill their family and themselves. But it started to lose sense when Huckleberry Finn knows or finds out that the plans and the robberies and everything that Tom Sawyer talks about is just based on books and fantasies. Then the rising action starts when Pap, this man at the left side of your screen, which is Huckleberry Finn's dad, kidnaps him from Widow Douglas' house. And the reason why he wants his son back is because Huckleberry Finn actually has a trust with $6,000, and this trust gives him $1 per day. So the main interest of Pop is not to be with his son. It is to have his money and use it for drinking, since Pop was the town's drunk. And the book talks about how Pop abuses Huckleberry Finn, and he's really violent and disruptive and really unpredictable. Then Pop locks Huckleberry Finn into an isolated cabin, far away from Widow Douglas' house. Huckleberry Finn, tired of all this abuse and violence, fakes his own death and escapes to Jackson's Island, which was an island near the town, and it was really peaceful and really quiet. Here he finds Jim, which is an Afro-American slave that used to work at Miss Watson's house. He actually escaped because Jim was supposed to be sold to other masters, and he obviously does not want to go to other masters, since also he hears that these masters are far more violent than Miss Watson, and obviously he doesn't want that. And the main goal of Jim, this slave, was to travel to Cairo, which was a free state, to work and to free his family. Actually, buy his family's freedom, since then you had to buy slaves as they were property of someone else. Then here Huckleberry Finn come across Jim in this island, and Huckleberry Finn, faces a quandary because Huck's conscience tells him to help Jim because he was a really good person and he knew him before at Widow Douglas' house, and he wants to help him because he actually empathizes with his situation, but his moral conscience tells him that this is illegal and that he should turn in Jim to his masters, because by covering him and by helping him to escape, he was breaking the law because he was kind of stealing a property, since at that time Jim as a slave was considered a property, right? Well, in the Rising Action, then it's really hard to tell all the adventures that they experienced, but we try to narrow it to the most relevant ones. And after they meet at this island, Jim and Huckleberry Finn start an adventure and a trip down in a raft, this wooden type of boat, down the Mississippi River, which is the setting of this whole story. Well, further in their journey, they get lost and they experience many adventures. And at one point, the raft, this wooden type of boat, is hidden by a steamboat. You know, these giant steamboats that we saw in the pictures before. And so they separate again, since they've already separated before, because of the fog, right? And Huckleberry Finn was taken in by the Grangerfords. Okay, this is a picture of the people, and the Grangerfords was an aristocratic family of Kentucky, and they had a really strong and long lasted rivalry with the Shepherdsons, which was another aristocratic family, right? This rivalry had lasted like nearly 30 years. And Huckleberry Finn becomes friend with Buck Grangerford, which was a boy of a similar age. They go to church. The Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons go to the same church, and this church talks about loving your neighbor, the commandments of the Bible, and all what a good person should do under the eyes of God. But it is really difficult to understand how you go to church and then you have this so strong hate towards a whole family, right? Then the older sister, Buck, from the Grangerfords family, escapes and falls in love with one man from the Jeffersons. So this obviously triggers a huge fight where the Jeffersons murdered the entire Grangerford's family, including Huckleberry Finn's friend, Buck. This is really sad, and then Huck has to run away again, and he finds Jim. Fortunately, Jim has fixed the raft, and they continue their travel through the Mississippi River. Then, during the racing action, while they are traveling in the raft in the Mississippi River, they come across the Duke and the King, which are actually both scammers and thieves, which pretend to be from the royalty, a Duke and a King. So obviously, Huckleberry Finn is really skeptical about it, but he lets them jump into the raft. They go town to town, scamming different and various local various local citizens, and the Duke and the King perform like actors to trick people and to steal their money. Here you can see in the picture how they set up like a theater in order to scam the people for them to give their money. In the next town, they pretend, the Duke and the King pretend to be brothers of Peter Wilkes, which is a really wealthy man who passed away. And they want to gather the inheritance money. But Huckleberry Finn does not want to harm the ladies that were relatives to this Peter Wilkes, because these ladies treated him really nice and really care about him. And so Huckleberry Finn decides to steal the money, the inheritance money, and puts it in the coffin of Peter Wilkes' dead body. Everything comes out to the light, and the Duke and the King ended up being discovered, and the city, the town, and the local citizens kicked out the Duke and the King from the city. Finally, Huck runs away in his raft once again. And Daniela is going to keep telling you the plot.
Yes. Okay, so we have reached the climax. The climax. And as Rocio mentioned before, there are several adventures, and this is when the story gets interesting, like more interesting. So Huck runs away from the king and the duke because he was very tired of the schemes, the frauds, the lie, and he runs away from them and goes to find Jim. However, he couldn't find him. Therefore, he asked someone who was there, a local person, in an innocent manner. He asks him if he knows anything, and he tells him that the king turned Jim out, and Jim was basically sold for $40 to a man named Silas Phelps, that we're going to talk about that later, about the Phelps farm. So in this point of the story, we could say that Huck doesn't know what to do about it. I mean, he first writes a letter to Miss Watson, because it could be better to be in a known place that to be in prison in a foreign land. He even prays, even though he does not have a strong religious beliefs. So he tries to find different solutions in order to decide whether this is wrong or this is right, whether he would help Jim or not. And I'm going to quote here. He says, "All right, I'll go to hell," because he knows that Jim is a slave, and he is not supposed to help a slave because slavery was legal and was the right path to go. But so the dilemma is that that on the one hand we have Huck, and on the other hand we have the society, and in the middle there is Jim. So there is two different perceptions here. The one from Huck, which is he considers Jim as a friend, as a person who has feelings, regardless his skin pigmentation, a person who also has a family and needs his help. And on the other hand, we have the society perception of Jim, which is that he is an educated person who is considered an object that we can purchase, we can manipulate the way we decide. So in order to do the actual right thing, Huck needs to break the law, and that's the morality that is in constant fight. So when Huck, so he finally decides to go to this farm, to the Phelps farm, and the moment he got there, he sees a woman. And this woman, this lady, tells him, "Oh, you're finally here. Hello, Tom." He confuses him with another person, and that person is named Tom, and that Tom is specifically Tom Sawyer, the friend, Huck's friend. And so he goes away with the situation, and he pretends to be Tom. During the story, they finally meet, Tom and Huck. However, Tom believes that he's seen a ghost because he wasn't prepared for the situation. But Huck explains the issue that he is going through, and he asks him for help because he wanted to set Jim free. So Tom agrees to the cause, to help him, and pretends to be someone else, and he always plays these tricks. He always pretends to be someone else because he likes adventurous activities and experiences. So Huck is very convinced of breaking his morals and help Jim. And also, it is very shocking that Tom is willing to help Huck, because we need to understand that Tom represents society, a society in which slavery is the legal path, the legal way to proceed. Therefore, this is very strange that he wants to break the law as well. And eventually, they think of many plans to set Jim free, and they found out the place where Jim was hidden. And Tom has strong influences on Huck and convinces him to follow his lead and to follow any ideas and any plans without any complainings. And at this moment of the story, we can see that Huck loses his morals and his selfness because he follows the ideas, the pranks, the cruel plans that Tom comes up with. And so it is very surprising that, considering everything that Jim and Huck went through, Huck would decide, that everything Huck and Jim went through, Huck would decide to follow these awful plans. And that's very controversial in this part of the story. And finally, the boys go to the hut. The hut was this place where Jim was imprisoned, and notice a hole in the wall which would allow Jim to escape. However, Tom decides, and he insists that they dig a hole anyway. And the next day, they follow a slave who was supposed to feed Jim. And once the slave was distracted, Tom explains the plan to Jim. And it is important to acknowledge here as well that Tom is very disappointed of how easy this would be, because he wanted to recreate one of these many adventure stories that he reads in his book. in his books, which contains ridiculous schemes and silly games. So we can conclude that Tom and Huck are very opposite boys. On the one hand, Tom is very childish and selfish, whose entertaining is the more important aspect for him. And on the other hand, we have Huck, who is a practical boy, a very conscious person who is always questioning himself whether to do the right thing or to break the law in order to help a person in distress. And Jim, on the contrary, lacks of self-awareness because he hasn't received an education. Therefore, he accepts those silly plans, and he believes that Tom is an intelligent boy and that he would know better than him. So he goes away. He accepts all the plans as well. So to Tom, Jim's freedom is not a hurry, it's just a joke, and they keep doing these silly tricks for weeks, you know. One of the examples of these ideas, of Tom's ideas, is, for instance, to grow a flower with Jim's tears. That's very cruel. You know, they were torturing Jim in order to get some fun out of it. And another one is to bring a rock to Jim's cell. This means that they would take Jim out of the cell, tell him to bring a rock, and then imprison him again. You know, do you get the point? That's very frustrating for Jim and also cruel. And so Tom's attitude, it's just can be interpreted as a master. He thinks that Jim is an object that he can manipulate and get and annoy him, you know. So after 3 weeks, Jim is ready for the escape. So Tom writes anonymous letters and loaded threats in his own blog to the Phelps, this family that owns the farm. And at this point of the story, Tom is in incomplete control of the action, and he has turned everything upside down. Also, Tom can be viewed as an insensitive person and a spoiled boy who is interested in his own entertainment and nothing else. In chapter 40, there are 15 armed farmers gathered at the Phelps farm, and Huck is in panic because of the 15 people that are armed, that they're going to harm them. But on the contrary, Tom is excited about this news, and because of the turn of the events. So when they were ready to free Jim, the farmers came. These 3 people, the 3 boys, escaped through the hole they dug in the hut, in the place that Jim was hidden, and the farmers were shooting at them while they were running and while they were escaping. And the 3 got to the raft, and there was supposed to be freedom. However, Tom says that he was shot in the leg, and Huck goes to find a doctor, and Jim insists in staying with Tom. We know already that Tom can't take anything seriously. Therefore, Jim's insistence on getting a doctor is endangering his freedom. And in a certain way, Huck cannot find a doctor because he falls asleep. He fell asleep. So he goes to the Phelps farm, which was Aunt Solly, and she makes sure that Huck stayed there because it was supposed to be a safe place. But she was also worried about Tom as well. So the doctor brings Tom back on a mattress, and he wasn't fully conscious. And additionally, Jim was tied up. and the townspeople wanted to hang Jim because he was a slave and he escaped and those many reasons. But they couldn't because they weren't his masters. So instead, they hit him and lock him up in chains. And this is the most controversial part of the story, and the dark and ironic part, the tone that we can analyze here is that when Tom wakes up, he confesses and he tells everything he did was to set Jim free. However, he finally reveals that Jim was freed by Miss Watson. Remember, Miss Watson was the owner of Jim, this slave, this character, and she passed away. Therefore, Jim was already a free person, a free slave. And Miss Watson passed away weeks after Huck ran off. So Tom signifies the worst of white people, and that's the end of the story, in which Tom knows that he knows all the time that Jim was a free person, but he still wants to make the silly plans, do these tricks, and focus on his own entertainment rather than caring about his Jim's feelings and his desire to come back with his family. Yeah, that's the resolution.
Yes, and there is and also the resolution when everything comes out to light and the truth is known by everyone. Sorry, Jim, as Daniela said, becomes a free slave, and Huckleberry Finn decides to look for a future and new adventures on himself. And here is a picture of him walking away to live his life, going to the back country, it says there, but was the part where slavery was abolished already. So he wants to escape he wants to go to the free states to escape all this trouble and all this slavery that obviously he didn't agree with, and this whole story only confirmed that slavery was a bad thing and that it should be abolished.
Yeah. So that's the turn of the events that we tried to describe.
Yes, it was.
And there's so many events in the story because there are so many adventures as well. So we try to keep focus on the most relevant ones. Yeah, yes. In order for you to understand the main topic and the controversial aspect of this book and why it is in a certain way criticized.
Yes. Well, now we are going to take a look to the characters, right?
Yes. So Huck is the protagonist. It is a boy who has a drunken father, and his childhood hasn't been the most appropriate for his age, and he's a very conscious boy, and he throughout the story he's getting more mature and in a constant struggle of deciding whether to face his moral, to break the law, and to make decisions on his own. Tom Sawyer is a friend of Huck. They're friends, but it is a very childish boy, a selfish person who's only interested in his own entertainment and amusement, and who doesn't care about anyone. He doesn't care about people of color feelings, and he represents society at the end of the story. Jim, it is an an Afro-American slave, a very honest person who has a family and who has been mistreated, and a person who has been treated as well as an object that you can purchase and has faced a lot of awful situations. Then Miss Watson is Widow Douglas's sister. She tries to educate Huck in a religious manner and with a strict beliefs.
Yes. Then Widow Douglas is a character. It is a really religious older woman who is part of the civilized society and wants to civilize Huck. And she teaches him manners and religion, reads the Bible to him, and it is represented as the religious and civilized aspect of society. And she tries to teach Huck all the time about what's good and what's bad, and she represents this Huckleberry Finn's moral conscience. Then Pop is Huck's father. He's drunk and violent man. He's very messy, and he is really
Irresponsible.
Yeah, and reckless. He is really impulsive as well. And then the Duke and the King are within the story are nameless. Their name is Duke and the King. They are scammers who claim to be someone they are not. They are liars, and they always try to take advantage and steal money from good people.
Now we're going to talk about the symbols in the story. First, we have the raft. The raft represents balance, stability, security, protection, and support. The raft was a home for Jim and Huck. It was a comfortable place, and it provides them safety. Whenever they were on the raft, they would feel relieved because they would feel they would be away from the dangers that sometimes people were following them in order to to harm them. Then we have the Mississippi River. We have already talked about this. This place, this river represents freedom, a sense of serenity, and peacefulness. Sorry, that's on the one hand. That's the positive aspect. This river was a peaceful place for them, a way of escaping of the reality. They could enjoy the natural surroundings while traveling on the raft, and they could get away from anything. Go, Rosie.
Yes, and the other side of this coin was that the Mississippi River also represented the cruelty, the dangers, and the threats that life can show you, right? And during the story, in the river, Jim and Huck find out that bodies, dangers, and at one point they get lost because of the fog of the river. So this river has it's like a double faced coin, in which you can find freedom and all the good things, serenity and peacefulness. But you also need to be careful because it also contains the really raw and ugly side of life. And this, even though this is a naturalistic type of story, the river is perceived as kind of a divine entity, or a really infinite natural entity, because the river we're going to see later in the literary devices, it is Huck talks about the river as it was mystic and mysterious and such an incredible place. So therefore Mississippi River has this meaning. Then in Jackson's Island, which is where initially Huckleberry Finn runs away and meets Jim, this island represents a new start in their lives. And this island represents also freedom and like a new start
Beginning.
for their lives. Yeah, a new beginning, which actually doesn't last long, but this is like the main meaning of this symbol. Okay, then we have the literary devices that were used in the story. Here we have one. Every time he got money, he got drunk. And every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town. And every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. This is an allusion to the Bible, since we already talked about the religiousness and how this played a main role in the story. This part alludes to Cain and how reckless and violent Pap, which is Huck's father, was. This was like describing Pap. Then we have the wind was trying to whisper something to me, which is a personification, because here the river, as we said, has like this mysterious and powerful sense for Huck, and he says that like the river was trying to tell him something. Next, we have not a sound anywhere, perfectly still, just like the whole world was asleep. This is a symbol. In here, Huck is describing the Mississippi River and how peaceful, quiet, and still it was for him, and how that would allow him to think and to organize his thoughts, right? And then we have, and there was Jackson's Island, big and dark and solid, like a steamboat without any lights. Well, here we have a mixture of a symbol and an imagery, because this Jackson Island, as we mentioned, was really well described, sorry, by this imagery. Like it was compared also as a big and dark and solid steamboat. And that what this meant for them. The Jackson's Island was like a really safe and strong place to be. Then Daniela?
I think we're running out of time. Maybe we can skip this one and go directly to the themes. I don't know if you could stay like 4 or 5 more minutes. We're about to finish.
Yep.
I think so. I think we only have 5 more minutes to finish the book report, and then the round questions could be left for a different moment, right?
Sure.
Sure.
So let's go
to the themes.
Okay, sorry. The themes. So first we have racism. Racism is represented with slavery. I mean, the slavery was legal back in those times in the story, and we can also see that even though the story was written after slavery was abolished, there is still racism present and the whole story and nowadays current situation. We can identify this in the United States in the in the present, where there is power abuse with people of color, because just because of the skin pigmentation, and that is a theme that's present in the whole story. And also we can relate it to Chilean's current situation, where indigenous people are left aside because of some physical features, you know. So racism is still present everywhere, and the story is a clear example of how white supremacy is still present, and also is an an oppressive systemic
Institution, right?
institution. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Then we have self-awareness, because during these adventures, Huckleberry Finn and Jim also explore their own personal journey, and they take conscious about their acts, sorry, and what they mean for them. They realize what they do has consequences, and everything we do has an impact on people's life. Then we have religion, which was a really key point in this story, and how religion would sometimes I'm sorry,
Religion,
support
support.
some really bad aspects of society, and people would go to religion in order to justify their actions. There is also cruelty, because for slaves, they weren't considered a whole person or a worthy person. And now, as reading it now, we can realize how cruel life was for slaves, and how different it was for white people, for this white supremacy Daniela was talking about. And we also have a hypocrisy, because religion told you that you need to be a good person and follow God's commandments written in the Bible. And it is really well pictured during this Granger Ford and Jefferson's fight and rivalry, and how this hypocrisy was growing, and people think that they were good under the eyes of God, but they did really bad things, like hurting and being really violent towards slaves and towards themselves. And maturation, we can see throughout the story how Huckleberry Finn starts this maturation journey, and he starts as a young boy, not really knowing anything about life, but he ended up going to the free states because he thinks that's the answer and that's what's good, and that implies a great growth for himself, and the realization of how you are responsible for your actions, and your actions have impact on people's life. I don't know, Daniela, if you want to add something.
In terms of religion, we already mentioned that there is two different views: the civilized world and the uncivilized world, which was strengthened through religion. So the morals were imposed to the community, to civilizations, and that's also connected to hypocrisy, as Rocio mentioned, where people would go to church and would pray and would, I don't know, maybe could do some good deals. However, in real life, in reality, they own persons. I'm sorry, they own people. They support slavery, and that's very controversial, and they're opposite ideas. And in terms of cruelty as well, we could notice that Tom is a perfect example of cruelty, because he didn't care about someone else's feelings. He didn't care about Jim at all. He considered Jim as his object, as he was almost his owner, to treat him that badly. That's all my contribution.
Yes. Now, what are your thoughts about the book? Here we have the discussion, but I don't know if the professor
No, we don't
wants
have time.
to. Yeah, maybe we should have it another day. But here I put a picture of the of the Simpsons because there is a chapter in which this story is kind of resumed and discussed in the Simpsons. And here, Bart is Tom Sawyer, and Nelson represents Huckleberry Finn. If you remember that part.
Thank you very much for staying and for listening to us.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you, ladies, for the book report. It's a very multi-layered book that has many perspectives. That's why I think just an hour or 45 minutes was not enough to cover all of them in depth, right? I do have questions, but as I consider them a little bit complex for 3 minutes, I'm going to post them in the forum as well. Feel free to address any of them. Okay, I will give you a glimpse here in the chat, but they're going to be in the LMS.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I guess
Perfect.
it would be safe. Yeah, it would be safe to consider that probably next class we can just take the first 5 to 10 minutes to go over one question each of you, and then move on towards the following book report. So maybe one of the questions could be any of the ones in the snapshot that's in the chat room. Okay.
Okay, Professor.
Alrighty. I'm so sorry that we need to abruptly end up the book report. There are many things to be said about, particularly about,
Yes.
for example, the vernacular language used, the morals, right, that we get from this relationship between two characters that were opposite at that time, right? The white person represented by Huck and the black person represented by Jim, who were able to overcome this moral prejudices, right? And therefore, I invite you to take a look at the questions so you are ready for next session to start. Hopefully, I'm going to connect 5 minutes earlier, so maybe we can
Yes,
start with you
we could
ladies,
do that.
right?
Yes, that would
Right.
be great.
Great. And Catalina's asking the book report on Friday. I have two options, Sisikeri and an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I did not set up a specific order, considering that sometimes groups have issues, or things happen, and so both groups need to be ready on Friday. And I will leave the two groups to decide which one will be presenting on that particular day. We did not have a presentation on the Monday's makeup class. We had a general class discussion on particularly characters and motivations of the characters, and your classmates were able to judge, right? Like put on the characters' shoes. So that's why maybe we did not make progress in terms of the presentations. Alejandro?
Yes, my group would like to present on Friday, if that's okay with Catalina. Groups, I don't know.
No, actually, I was asking because we have to present the Great Gatsby, and it was supposed to be on Friday, but I think that because of the delay of the other presentations, but it doesn't matter. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm still open for one more makeup class, which could be, well, I don't think it could be on Friday, right after the session that we originally have, but it could be on Monday, maybe from 12 to 1 p.m. I guess that could be an option as well. So if you're not presenting on Friday, maybe that it could be a good option to take up the Monday session, the Monday makeup session, because we're missing 1 hour. Okay, so that could be one thing that you need to probably discuss between Alejandro's group and Catalina's group. If you're not giving your presentation on the Friday session, whether or not you will be able to give it on Monday on the makeup session from 12 to 1 p.m. Okay, I need to stop the session now because I have a class at 10:50.
Doesn't matter then.
Yeah, so please discuss that among yourselves and let me know which is your final decision, all right? But remember, I'm open to other options in case you can and want to have the makeup class, not necessarily on that Monday, next Monday, okay?
Okay.
Just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye, everyone. I'll see you
Bye.
on Friday. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Sorry about